For 13 days in October of 1962, humanity stood on the verge of total annihilation. If you ask the historians who have studied this event in detail how we survived, they will point to one specific factor. We got lucky. One wrong move, one missed signal, or one nervous officer was all it would have taken to trigger a war that could have killed hundreds of millions of people. To understand how the clock ticked this close to midnight, you have to look at the world they were living in. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in the Cold War, a standoff defined by deep distrust and world-ending arsenals. The countdown started on October 14th. An American U-2 spy plane was flying a routine surveillance mission over communist-aligned Cuba, taking high-altitude photographs of the landscape below. This annotated reconnaissance photo shows exactly what analysts in Washington found when they developed the film. The Soviet Union was secretly building nuclear missile launch sites a mere 90 miles off the coast of Florida. These launch sites changed the basic math of a nuclear strike. Before this discovery, a missile fired from Soviet territory gave American leaders about 30 minutes to detect the launch and respond. Missiles based in Cuba dropped that strike warning time to a matter of minutes. With the window to react nearly gone, the strategic buffer that had defined American security for decades had evaporated. President John F. Kennedy was immediately briefed on the photographs. He quietly assembled a tight circle of his most trusted advisors, forming the Executive Committee, or ExComm, to manage the crisis in secret. This long table in the White House Cabinet Room became the center of the crisis. Here, a small circle of advisors attempted to use logic and calculated diplomacy to navigate a way out of a total nuclear exchange. The debate inside that room was fierce. Several military advisors pushed for an immediate airstrike to destroy the sites or a full-scale invasion of the island. Others warned that firing on Soviet forces in Cuba would provoke a response in Europe, potentially triggering World War III. Kennedy settled on a middle path. He ordered a naval quarantine, a ring of American ships around Cuba, to inspect approaching Soviet vessels for military equipment. By calling it a quarantine rather than a blockade, he was attempting to draw a line in the sand without officially declaring war. On October 22nd, the veil of secrecy lifted. Kennedy went on national television and told the American public about the missile sites and the quarantine. In Washington, the leadership believed they had established a rational, controlled response. But the reality on the ground was quickly moving beyond the control of any single room. The true conflict was now playing out across the vast, open ocean, an environment defined by physical distance and isolation from the decision-makers in Washington. Soviet ships carrying military equipment and missile components were sailing directly toward the quarantine line. If the U.S. Navy attempted to forcibly stop them, the shooting would start. On October 24th, some Soviet ships stopped in the water or changed course. It was a signal that neither side was eager to fire the first shot. Behind the scenes, Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev were testing the waters for a resolution. Through a series of private letters, both leaders expressed a shared understanding of just how catastrophic a nuclear war would be. Despite this dialogue at the top, the scale of the military deployment meant that local events could now trigger a war before the leaders had a chance to stop it. The political strategy fell apart on October 27th, a day now known as Black Saturday. Over Cuba, an American U-2 spy plane was shot down by a Soviet surface-to-air missile, killing the pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson. In Washington, the pressure to escalate peaked instantly. Military advisors demanded an immediate retaliatory strike, arguing that the Soviet attack demanded a direct response. While the crisis peaked in the skies over Cuba, a silent threat was moving below the surface of the Atlantic. A Soviet submarine carrying a nuclear-tipped torpedo was attempting to evade the U.S. Navy. The crew was under immense strain. American destroyers were dropping depth charges to force them to surface. Inside the sub, the heat was extreme, the air was running out, and they had been cut off from communications for days. The officers on board believed World War III had already begun above them. Firing the submarine's nuclear torpedo required agreement from all 3 senior officers. Under the stress of the depth charges, 2 of those officers were in favor of launching. The final decision rested with an officer named Vasily Arkhipov. He refused to give his consent. By holding his ground against his fellow officers, he prevented a launch that likely would have sparked an uncontrollable global escalation. The near misses on Black Saturday pushed Kennedy and Khrushchev to find a final diplomatic resolution. They realized they were losing control of their own military forces. The public deal was straightforward. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba, and the United States pledged not to invade the island. But there was a hidden half to the deal. The United States secretly agreed to remove its own nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey. Kennedy insisted this remain a secret to avoid appearing as though the U.S. was yielding under pressure. This teletype machine was part of the new Moscow-Washington hotline. It was installed immediately after the crisis to ensure the 2 governments could communicate without the delays that had made those 13 days so dangerous. The terror of the crisis forced both nations to reconsider the strategy of brinkmanship. This realization led directly to the first major arms control treaties of the Cold War. The peaceful resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was the result of individual restraint, desperate diplomacy, and a significant amount of blind luck. It stands as a reminder of how easily the world can be pushed to the edge and how fragile the systems designed to protect it actually are.